Today marks a year since the submission of the final segments of the state capture report.
The man who presided over that process, the now Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, says state capture definitely tainted the country's democracy. Speaking at a colloquium hosted by the Human Sciences Research Council, Zondo said rules and policies were flouted to loot the state coffers.
The topic that I've been asked to address, as I have indicated, has the capturing of the state placed our democracy at risk? The answer to the question is an unequivocal yes. However, it is necessary to start at the beginning. And the beginning is that when the Commission began its hearings, it invited two international experts on state capture to give evidence before it. Those were Professor Kaufman and Hellman, and they gave a definition of state capture that included that the state captors make illicit payments to government officials in order to get them to change the rules of the game or rules and regulations to advantage.
The Chief Justice says the President of the country and the ANC enabled the capture of the state by the Guptas.
State capture that was pursued by the Guptas and their associates was anchored on the influence and control they had on the head of state, who was also the president of the ruling party, and ensured that he would engineer the removal from strategic positions in SOEs of persons who would not be prepared to cooperate with the Guptas in wrongdoing. And he would appoint to those strategic positions people who would cooperate with the Guptas and with those who had influence on him.
Now, the state capture report contained a number of recommendations about holding perpetrators to account. Well, how far is that process, and can it be sped up? We're joined now by CASA's Lawson Naidoo. Lawson, good evening. Thank you so much for your time. The one thing that's clear is that the work of the State Capture Commission was only going to be given full meaning through the work that needed to be done by the investigative bodies. I'm talking the Hawks, I'm talking SIU and NPA, because those are really the bodies that are able to ensure some kind of accountability and criminal liability. Unfortunately, the pace around which that work has done has been underwhelming.
Good afternoon, Kathy. Thank you very much. Indeed, that is the case. It's certainly the pace of investigations and prosecutions of those implicated in Chief Justice Zondo's report has been woefully slow and inadequate, one must say. And the NPA has tried to explain why things take so long, that they can't just take the information that was presented at the Commission and simply take that to court. They've got to do further investigations to corroborate the evidence that was presented and bring watertight cases to court. So that does take time, but I think the country is impatient because we want to see consequences for those who were implicated in the reports of the State Capture Commission. And I think there needs to be a lot of pressure on the NPA, the Hawks, the investigating directorate, to speed up these investigations and bring those perpetrators to book.
Lawson, if one were to give the NPA the benefit of the doubt around the fact that it takes time to put together solid cases, and we judge them just by the one case that they've been able to enroll that is directly linked to state capture in the Free State, that particular case has fallen through. And unfortunately, it hasn't done much to inspire confidence in even the work that the NPA has done over that particular prosecution.
Indeed, that is the case. That's the Newzroom case that you referred to, which
yes.
resulted in an acquittal of the accused. And I think that was highly embarrassing for the NPA that case fell apart as it did. However, we must note that the NPA is taking that matter on appeal, so we'll have to wait and see what happens there. But I think in terms of the broader issue you raised, Kathy, it is a serious concern that, we know that, the NPA was one of those institutions that was hollowed out during this period of state capture, as Chief Justice Zondo made mention of in the earlier insert you had, about the impact that state capture had on our institutions. And whilst there has been some progress in rehabilitating the NPA, the Hawks, and now with the establishment of the investigating directorate, much more needs to be done. It's clear that resources are being made available. But one of the issues that hampers the investigating directorate in particular is the failure of government to create that structure as a permanent entity. This is one of the issues that President Ramaphosa, in his response to Parliament in October last year, said that government would do. But 10 months down the line, we don't yet see legislation being introduced in Parliament to create the ID as a permanent feature. And the reason why that is important, because the lack of permanence, hampers the ability of the investigation directorate to hire the forensic and other technical expertise that it requires in order to investigate and prosecute these cases. So I don't think that's an excuse for the investigating directorate, but I think some share of the responsibility must go to the executive. And I think it speaks to the lack of urgency with which government is dealing with the recommendations of the Commission of Inquiry.
Not just lack of urgency, I'd say, Lawson, but there doesn't seem to be political imperative to actually implement the recommendations, because if we're being honest here, there are decisions around accountability when it comes to some of those implicated in the state capture report that doesn't necessarily begin and end with the NPA. And I'm talking here about high-profile individuals, politicians, who have been named and yet still very much enjoy the power of their positions. And it's business as usual. Life is going on.
Indeed, Kathy. I mean, I think you're absolutely correct. I mean, for example, I think you're referring really to people who are implicated in the State Capture Commission reports, who are members of the National Executive, serving either as members of cabinet or deputy ministers, who were implicated. And again, the president said he would, initiate a process to evaluate each of those people. But we have no idea whether any progress has been made in that regard. Nobody has been removed from their positions as a result of being implicated in those reports. So it really does speak to the issue of there being no sense of urgency, no sense that this is a priority for the country, that given the devastation that state capture wrought on South Africa, that we should be dealing with this far more seriously than we are. But government does not appear to give it that level of priority that I think it requires.
Lawson, just on the issue of resources, we know just what a big issue it has been for the NPA. And just earlier this week, the Justice Ministry, of course, revealing that the NPA has received about 43 million rand worth of private donations to help it do its work. Mixed reaction about whether this is really a good idea to have the NPA receiving funds, especially to the tune of that much money in executing what is essentially a public service.
Indeed, it's important that, the NPA is adequately equipped to deal with the challenges that it faces, the numerous investigations and prosecutions that are necessary. And I think, there will obviously be questions around external funding, private funding for the NPA. But so long as sufficient checks and balances are in place and there's oversight over where that money comes from, how that money is deployed, and that there's no association between the source of that funds and trying to determine the priorities of the NPA must continue to operate as it is constitutionally mandated to do, without fear, favor, or prejudice. So resources are welcome, but they must be procured and spent in a manner that does not undermine the independence
It
of the
seems
NPA.
to me that the only way to keep a process like that honest, especially in the eye of the public, is to make declarations, make it public where that funding is coming from, Lawson, because without it, if you expect political parties to declare who's funding them simply over issues around conflict of interest, surely that rings true for an entity such as the NPA, which we know historically has been prone to interference.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more, Kathy. The transparency is one of those checks and balances that I refer to. That there needs to be full transparency so that we understand where that money is has come from, and for the NPA to tell us how those resources are being used, how they're using that to build their capacity in terms of technical expertise, bringing in private sector experience on certain specialist areas that they lack within the NPA. So long as there's full openness about that, I think we can accept that. But that there must be that full openness in order to ensure, as I say, that the integrity of the NPA is not compromised in any way.
All right. I'm going to end it off with this question, Lawson. It's very different to what we've been discussing, but certainly a developing story tonight, something that's been with South Africa for many, many years now. Judge Nkola Motata, you'd remember him, a retired judge. He's currently facing impeachment after the Supreme Court of Appeal has now found him guilty of gross misconduct. You remember that notorious drunk driving incident that took place in January 2007. Of course, it ended up being a big back and forth and a big case, really. Since then, he's retired. But this is the latest that we have coming out of the Supreme Court of Appeal, Lawson.
Yeah, well, look, I haven't seen that story, Kathy, but, I think this matter has dragged on for a very long time. It has been through the courts. It's been through the judicial disciplinary processes of the JSC. But ultimately, there must be accountability for wrongdoing. And if the court has found that the judge has committed misconduct, then the consequences must follow from that. But I think, it also speaks to the broader issue of the Judicial Service Commission being able to streamline its disciplinary processes, ensure that there are a quicker processes in place. We still have the saga of Judge Shlope hanging over us. The impeachment process in Parliament has stalled because of continuing court cases. When matters come to finality, I think we must acknowledge and accept them, but lament the fact that it's just taken us so long to extract the accountability that we need. And I think this does speak to our earlier point, in that, accountability for state capture, accountability for wrongdoing in public service has to be dealt with, and has to be dealt with effectively and speedily.
CASIC's Lawson Naidoo, we'll leave it there for this evening. Thanks for your time tonight. Stephen,